The rain was coming down hard at London Heathrow Airport that Tuesday evening. Queen Camilla walked quickly through the private royal terminal, her high heels clicking on the marble floor. She was trying to catch the last flight to Scotland before the big storm hit. Behind her, two large black suitcases rolled on wheels, making soft sounds on the smooth ground. Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell had been working at the airport for 15 years. She knew all the important people who came and went. But tonight felt different. Her radio crackled with a message that made her heart beat faster. Intelligence had received a tip about something suspicious involving a member of the royal family. Sarah watched from behind a glass window as Camilla approached the security checkpoint. Even royals had to go through some safety checks when flying, though they usually got special treatment. The Queen Consort looked nervous, checking her expensive watch every few seconds. Her usually perfect hair seemed a bit messy from the rain outside. The royal protection officers stood nearby, but they kept their distance. This was normal procedure. Even they couldn't interfere with airport security when there was a serious concern. Sarah took a deep breath and walked toward the checkpoint. She had a job to do, no matter who was involved. The X-ray machine operator, a young man named James, had been doing this job for 3 years. He had seen everything from forgotten kitchen knives to exotic animals. But when Camilla's first suitcase went through the scanner, his face went pale. The image on his screen showed something that shouldn't be there. Camilla stood on the other side of the metal detector, tapping her foot. She kept looking at the departure board. Her flight was boarding in 20 minutes. She needed to get through security fast, but James had stopped the conveyor belt. He was staring at his screen with wide eyes. Sarah walked over to James and looked at the X-ray image. What she saw made her stomach drop. Inside the elegant suitcase were several rectangular packages wrapped in thick plastic. They were arranged carefully between layers of expensive clothes. The packages were dense and dark on the screen, which usually meant one thing. The terminal suddenly felt very quiet. Other passengers had been moved to different security lines. Royal protection officers began making phone calls. Camilla noticed the delay and walked back toward the X-ray machine. Her face showed confusion, then worry. Sarah knew she had to follow protocol. She couldn't let anyone pass without checking suspicious items, even the Queen Consort. She took another look at the screen and nodded to James. They would need to open the suitcase. This was about to become the biggest case of her career. The automatic doors at the far end of the terminal opened. More security personnel entered quietly. Word was already spreading through the airport that something major was happening, but nobody knew exactly what. The rain outside seemed to get heavier, as if the weather knew that this ordinary Tuesday night was about to become extraordinary. Camilla's second suitcase was still waiting to go through the scanner. Sarah wondered what they might find in that one, too. She had never been so nervous about opening a piece of luggage in her entire career. Whatever was inside those packages would change everything for the royal family. Sarah's hands shook slightly as she put on her blue latex gloves. The security area had been cleared of other passengers, and now only essential personnel remained. The Queen Consort stood nearby, her face pale under the bright airport lights. She kept touching her pearl necklace, a nervous habit that photographers had noticed at royal events. The first suitcase lay open on the metal examination table. Sarah carefully moved aside layers of silk scarves and cashmere sweaters. Everything smelled expensive, like the kind of perfume that cost more than most people's monthly salary. But underneath the luxury clothes, her fingers found the first plastic-wrapped package. It was heavier than expected. The package was about the size of a thick book, wrapped tightly in black plastic and sealed with clear tape. Sarah held it up to the light, trying to see what was inside without opening it. The shape was definitely rectangular and it felt solid. Her heart was beating so fast she was sure everyone could hear it. Camilla stepped forward, her voice shaky. "There must be some mistake," she said softly. "I packed that suitcase myself this morning. I was only bringing clothes and personal items to Balmoral Castle." Her accent, usually so confident and royal, now sounded uncertain and worried. Detective Inspector Mitchell had seen many people lie during her career, but something in Camilla's voice made her think the Queen Consort was telling the truth. The confusion in her eyes looked real. If Camilla didn't pack these mysterious packages herself, then someone else had access to her luggage. The second package was slightly smaller, but just as heavy. As Sarah lifted it from between a cashmere coat and silk pajamas, she noticed something strange. The plastic wrapping had a small tear in one corner. Through the tiny hole she could see something that looked like old paper or cardboard. James, the X-ray operator, came closer to look. "Ma'am," he whispered to Sarah, "I've been thinking. These packages don't look like drugs or weapons. The density is different. It's more like books or documents or something." His observation made everyone pause and think. Royal Protection Officer Captain David Ross had been silent until now. He was a tall man with gray hair who had protected the royal family for over 20 years. He stepped forward carefully. "Your Majesty," he said to Camilla, "we need to ask some questions about your morning routine. Who had access to your luggage before you left for the airport?" Camilla thought for a moment, pressing her hand to her forehead. "Well, there was Margaret, my personal assistant. She helped me pack. And Thomas, the butler, carried the suitcases to the car. The driver, William, loaded them into the trunk." She paused. "Oh, and the housekeeping staff had been in my room earlier to clean." Sarah made mental notes of each name. Someone on that list had placed these packages in the Queen Consort's luggage. But why? And what was so important that it needed to be hidden among royal belongings? The airport security chief, a serious man named Robert Kane, arrived with 2 more officers. He had been called from his dinner at home and still had sauce on his tie. "What's the situation?" he asked quietly. Sarah showed him the packages and explained what they had found. Robert's expression grew darker as he listened. "We need to open them," he said finally. "But we should do it carefully. If these contain what I think they might, we could be looking at a matter of national security." The words hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Camilla sat down in a nearby chair, looking suddenly very tired. The rain outside was still falling hard, and her flight to Scotland had already left without her. She stared at her suitcases as if seeing them for the first time. "In 40 years of public life," she said quietly, "nothing like this has ever happened to me." Sarah picked up a small knife to carefully cut the tape on the first package. Everyone in the room held their breath. Whatever was inside these mysterious packages was about to be revealed, and it would either clear up a simple misunderstanding or start one of the biggest scandals in recent royal history. The knife sliced through the tape with a soft ripping sound that seemed louder than thunder in the quiet security room. Sarah peeled back the black plastic carefully, as if she was unwrapping a dangerous bomb. Inside was something nobody expected to see: old photographs. Dozens of them, some in black and white, others in faded color. The pictures were carefully arranged in plastic protective sleeves, the kind museums use for historical documents. Sarah picked up the first photo and gasped. It showed a young woman who looked exactly like Princess Diana, but the clothes and setting were from the 1920s. Camilla leaned forward, her confusion growing deeper. "I've never seen these before in my life," she whispered. The photograph showed the Diana-like woman standing next to a man in military uniform, outside what looked like Buckingham Palace. But the architecture was slightly different. Detective Inspector Mitchell examined more photos. Each one showed people who looked remarkably similar to current royal family members, but dressed in clothing from different time periods. There was a man who could have been Prince William's twin, wearing a World War I uniform. Another photo showed someone who looked like King Charles, but as a young man in Victorian-era clothing. Security Chief Robert Kane studied the images with growing alarm. "These aren't just old family photos," he said slowly. "Look at the backgrounds. Some of these buildings don't exist anymore. And these people, they look too much like current royals to be a coincidence." James, the X-ray operator, pointed to something written on the back of one photograph. In faded ink, someone had written dates and names. But the names were strange. Instead of Charles, it said Charles VII. Instead of William, it said William VI. The dates went back over 200 years. Captain Ross, the Royal Protection Officer, had gone very quiet. His face was pale, and he kept looking between the photos and Camilla. "Ma'am," he said finally, "I think someone is trying to send a message. Or maybe someone is trying to prove something." Sarah opened the second package with even more care. Inside were documents handwritten on old paper that looked genuine. The writing was in old-fashioned script, difficult to read, but she could make out some words: bloodline, succession, hidden truth, and rightful heir. One document appeared to be a family tree, but not the official royal family tree that everyone knew. This one showed different names and different relationships. According to this chart, The current royal family wasn't supposed to be on the throne at all. Someone else was the rightful heir to the British crown. Camilla stood up suddenly, her chair scraping against the floor. "This is ridiculous," she said, but her voice was shaking. "Someone is playing a cruel joke. These documents are obviously fake. Why would anyone put them in my luggage?" The third package contained more documents, these ones looking more recent. There were copies of birth certificates, marriage records, and death certificates. All the names were slightly different from the official royal records. Instead of Elizabeth II, one certificate read, Elizabeth Stuart II. Instead of George VI, another read, George Stuart VI. Robert Kane was making phone calls now, speaking in hushed tones to people in London. Sarah could hear fragments of his conversation. Need historians immediately. Authentication required. Potential threat to crown. Detective Inspector Mitchell realized this was no longer just an airport security issue. If these documents were real, they suggested that the entire British royal family had been living under false identities for generations. If they were fake, then someone had gone to enormous trouble to create a very elaborate hoax. The final package was the heaviest. Inside was a thick leather journal, bound with a brass lock that had been broken long ago. The pages were filled with handwritten entries in different inks, suggesting multiple people had written in it over many years. The first entry was dated 1952, the year Queen Elizabeth II began her reign. Sarah read the first few lines aloud. "The truth must be preserved. They think they destroyed all the evidence, but some of us remember. The real heir lives in hiding, waiting for the right moment. The crown belongs to another bloodline entirely." The room fell completely silent except for the sound of rain against the windows. Everyone stared at the journal as if it was a poisonous snake. If these documents were authentic, they contained enough information to destroy the British monarchy forever. Camilla sank back into her chair, looking devastated. "Someone is trying to frame me," she said quietly. "They want people to think I'm involved in some sort of conspiracy against my own family. But why? What did I do to deserve this?" Outside, police cars were arriving at the airport. Word was spreading that something major was happening, though nobody knew exactly what. Sarah realized this quiet Tuesday evening had turned into what might be the most important discovery in British history, or the most dangerous lie ever told. Within 30 minutes, the small security room had transformed into something resembling a war room. People in expensive suits arrived from London, carrying briefcases and speaking in urgent whispers. Sarah recognized some faces from television, high-ranking government officials who usually only appeared during national emergencies. Dr. Margaret Thornton, Britain's leading expert on royal historical documents, had been rushed from the British Museum. She was a small woman with thick glasses who handled the photographs and papers like they were made of glass. Her examination was thorough and silent, occasionally making small notes in a leather notebook. Camilla sat in the corner, now accompanied by her personal lawyer, who had arrived by helicopter. The Queen Consort looked exhausted, still wearing her traveling clothes but no longer caring about her appearance. Every few minutes she would look at the documents spread across the table and shake her head in disbelief. Captain Ross was coordinating with security agencies that Sarah had never heard of. Men and women in dark clothing appeared and disappeared, carrying sealed envelopes and speaking into earpieces. The atmosphere was tense, like everyone was waiting for something terrible to happen. Dr. Thornton finally looked up from her examination, removing her glasses to clean them slowly. "The paper is authentic," she announced to the room. "These documents are genuinely old. The ink, the handwriting styles, the aging patterns, they're consistent with the time periods indicated." A collective intake of breath filled the room. Robert Kane stepped forward. "But are the contents accurate? Could these documents be real historical records?" The historian hesitated before answering. "That's more complicated. The writing styles match historical patterns from each era. The genealogical information, some of it aligns with documented facts, but other parts contradict official records." She paused. If someone created these as forgeries, they did an extraordinarily sophisticated job. Sarah studied the family tree document again. According to this chart, a branch of the Stuart family had survived in secret after officially dying out in 1807. The document claimed that Bonnie Prince Charlie had a secret son who was hidden away and raised under a different name. This hidden bloodline had supposedly continued for generations, Detective Inspector Mitchell had been thinking about the logistics. Dr. Thornton, how long would it take to create forgeries this convincing? Years, the historian replied immediately. Possibly decades. You would need access to period-appropriate materials, expert knowledge of historical handwriting, and detailed genealogical research. This isn't something someone could create in a few months. One of the government officials, a stern man named Director Harrison, spread out copies of the photographs on a larger table. Look at these images again. The people in these photos look exactly like current royal family members. That level of family resemblance across centuries could suggest either genuine bloodline connections or extremely sophisticated digital manipulation. James, the X-ray operator who had started this entire discovery, raised his hand nervously. Sir, I know about photo editing. These pictures don't look digitally altered. The grain patterns and color fading look natural for their supposed ages. Captain Ross had been making phone calls to Buckingham Palace. When he finished, his expression was grim. I've been in contact with the royal household. They want these documents secured immediately and examined by their own experts. They're also concerned about how this information might be used if it becomes public. Camilla finally spoke up, her voice stronger than before. I want to know who did this to me. Someone deliberately placed these materials in my luggage, knowing they would be discovered. This feels like an attack on my character and on the royal family. Dr. Thornton was examining the leather journal more closely. This is particularly interesting, she said. The journal entries span from 1952 to last year. Different handwriting styles suggest multiple authors. It appears to be some sort of record kept by people who believed they were documenting a hidden truth. Sarah read over the historian's shoulder. The journal contained detailed observations about royal family behaviors, suggestions about how to reveal the truth to the public, and plans for gathering evidence. The final entry, dated just 3 months ago, was chilling. The time for hiding is almost over. Soon everyone will know who really deserves the crown. Director Harrison closed his briefcase with a sharp click. We need to consider the possibility that this is part of a larger conspiracy. Someone may be planning to use these documents to challenge the legitimacy of the monarchy. They could be testing how the materials would be received by placing them where they would be discovered. The room fell quiet, as everyone considered the implications. If someone was planning to go public with these documents, the resulting scandal could damage the royal family's reputation permanently. Even if the documents were proven fake, the mere suggestion of illegitimacy could cause serious political problems. Robert Kane looked at his watch. It's been 2 hours since we opened these suitcases. By now, people are asking questions about why the Queen Consort missed her flight. We need to decide how to handle this situation before rumors start spreading. Camilla stood up slowly, straightening her jacket. Whatever these documents are, real, fake, or something in between, I did not put them in my luggage. Someone is using me as part of their plan. I want to know who, and I want to know why. Her voice carried the authority of someone who had spent years in the public eye, but underneath, Sarah could hear the fear of someone whose whole world might be about to change. The investigation began immediately. Detective Inspector Mitchell found herself leading the most sensitive case of her career, working alongside specialists from MI5, Scotland Yard, and Royal Security. They had transformed a conference room at the airport into a temporary investigation headquarters, complete with computers, phone lines, and secure communication equipment. The first breakthrough came when they examined the CCTV footage from Clarence's house, where Camilla had been staying. The cameras showed everyone who had access to her luggage on the morning of departure. Margaret, the personal assistant, had indeed helped with packing. Thomas, the butler, had carried the suitcases downstairs. But there was something else. Sarah pointed to a figure on the screen at 6:47 a.m. Who was that person entering the Queen Consort's room? The figure was wearing a housekeeping uniform, but their face was partially hidden by a cap pulled low. They stayed in the room for exactly 12 minutes before leaving with a small bag that hadn't been there when they entered. Captain Ross studied the footage carefully. I don't recognize that person. And according to the duty roster, no housekeeping staff were scheduled for that room until after Her Majesty's departure. He made a phone call to Clarence's house security, speaking quickly in code words that Sarah didn't understand. Meanwhile, Dr. Thornton was making her own discoveries with the documents. Using special equipment brought from the British Museum, she was analyzing the ink and paper in greater detail. Something very strange is happening here, she announced to the room. Some of these documents are definitely genuine historical artifacts, but others appear to be recent additions written on artificially aged paper. Director Harrison leaned forward intently. Are you saying someone has been adding false information to real historical documents? Exactly. It's like someone took authentic 18th and 19th century papers and inserted fabricated genealogical information alongside real family records. The result is a mixture of truth and fiction that would be very difficult to separate without extensive analysis. This revelation changed everything. Someone hadn't just created fake documents. They had somehow acquired genuine historical papers and manipulated them to support a false narrative. This required not only expert knowledge but also access to rare historical materials. Sarah was coordinating with the team investigating the housekeeping imposter. The person had used a valid security card that belonged to Maria Santos, a longtime employee who was supposed to be on vacation. When contacted, Maria confirmed she was in Spain visiting family and had left her security card in her locker at work. The investigation team pulled up more CCTV footage from different cameras around Clarence's house. They were able to track the imposters' movements from their arrival at 6:30 a.m. until their departure at 7:15 a.m. The person knew exactly where to go and seemed familiar with the building's layout. Dr. Thornton made another important discovery while examining the leather journal. Look at this, she said, pointing to a page near the middle of the book. This entry references specific events that happened in the royal family, but it includes details that were never made public. Private conversations, personal habits, internal family disputes that only someone very close to the royals would know. The journal entry she was showing them was dated 5 years ago and described a private argument between King Charles and Prince William about modernizing the monarchy. The details were so specific and personal that they could only have come from someone who was present during the conversation. Captain Ross read the passage, and his face went white. I remember this conversation. I was standing outside the door when it happened. Only 4 people were in that room: His Majesty Prince William and 2 senior advisors. He paused, thinking hard. One of those advisors was Sir Edmund Hartwell, who has been with the royal household for 30 years. Sarah felt pieces of a puzzle starting to come together. Where is Sir Edmund now? Is he still working for the royal family? He retired last year, Captain Ross replied slowly. There was some sort of disagreement about his pension arrangements. He felt he hadn't been treated fairly after decades of service. The implications of this information hung heavy in the air. Director Harrison was already making phone calls to locate Sir Edmund Hartwell. While they waited for information, the team continued analyzing the documents. They discovered that several of the photographs had been taken in locations that Sir Edmund would have had access to, including private areas of royal residences that were off-limits to most staff. The CCTV analysis yielded another clue. The imposter who had entered Camilla's room was approximately the same height and build as Sir Edmund Hartwell. Although the face was hidden, the person moved with the confident familiarity of someone who belonged in the royal household. Sarah studied the timeline of events. Sir Edmund had retired with grievances against the royal family. He had access to historical documents and private information. He knew the security procedures at royal residences, and someone matching his description had planted the mysterious packages in Camilla's luggage. But questions remained. Why choose Camilla as the target? Why reveal the documents now? And most importantly, how much of the historical information was accurate? Even if Sir Edmund was behind the plot, some of the documents appeared to be genuinely old and historically significant. Dr. Thornton was examining the family tree document under a magnifying glass when she made a startling discovery. There's something written in very faint pencil in the margin here, she announced. It says EH 2024, and there's an address in Scotland. The address was in a remote village in the Scottish Highlands, about 50 miles from Balmoral Castle, exactly where Camilla had been traveling when she was stopped at the airport. The coincidence seemed too obvious to be accidental. Director Harrison checked his watch. It's been 6 hours since this investigation began. We need to make some decisions. Do we pursue Sir Edmund Hartwell? Do we analyze these documents further? And what do we tell the public if word of this incident leaks out? Camilla, who had been quiet for the past hour, finally spoke. I want to see this through to the end. If someone is trying to damage my family using me as their messenger, I want to know the whole truth. Even if that truth is uncomfortable. The helicopter flight to Scotland took 2 hours through stormy weather. Sarah found herself in the unusual position of flying with the Queen Consort, Director Harrison, Captain Ross, and Dr. Thornton, to confront a man who might be trying to destroy the British monarchy. The address from the document led to a small stone cottage in Glenmorvan, surrounded by hills and forests. Sir Edmund Hartwell was waiting for them. The 68-year-old man stood in his doorway as if he had been expecting their arrival. He was tall and thin, with white hair and the posture of someone who had spent decades in formal service. His cottage was neat and organized, filled with books about British history and royal genealogy. "Your Majesty," he said to Camilla with a formal bow, "I wondered when you would find your way here. Please come in. We have much to discuss." His calm demeanor was unsettling. Most people would be nervous about being confronted by royal security and government officials. The cottage's main room was lined with filing cabinets and research materials. Maps of royal family trees covered the walls, some of them matching the documents found in Camilla's luggage. On a large desk sat copies of the same photographs they had discovered at the airport, along with additional materials that hadn't been in the suitcases. Sir Edmund gestured for everyone to sit down. "I suppose you want to know why I placed those documents in your luggage, Your Majesty. The answer is simple. Someone needed to find them, and you were the safest messenger I could choose." Camilla leaned forward, her voice controlled but angry. "You used me without my consent. You made me look like I was involved in some sort of conspiracy against my own family. Why should I trust anything you have to say?" The elderly man nodded thoughtfully. "Because, Your Majesty, everything in those documents is true. I have spent the last 40 years of my life quietly gathering evidence that the British royal family, as currently constituted, is not the legitimate heir to the throne." Dr. Thornton opened her notebook. "Sir Edmund, our analysis shows that some of the documents are authentic historical artifacts, but others appear to be recent fabrications. How do you explain this?" Sir Edmund walked to one of his filing cabinets and pulled out a thick folder. "Dr. Thornton, you are correct that some materials are recent, but they are not fabrications. They are copies of original documents that were hidden or destroyed over the past 2 centuries. I have been recreating lost records based on surviving evidence." He spread out additional photographs and documents on his desk. In 1807, when the Stuart line officially ended, there was a secret marriage and a hidden child. The official records were altered or destroyed, but some evidence survived in private collections and family archives. Director Harrison studied the new materials with skepticism. "Even if that were true, Sir Edmund, it happened over 200 years ago. Why does this matter now?" The old man's eyes became intense. "Because the rightful heir is still alive. The Stuart bloodline continued in secret through 7 generations. The current heir lives in Canada, completely unaware of their heritage. I have been documenting this bloodline for decades, waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth." Sarah felt like she was in the middle of a historical thriller novel. "Sir Edmund, you're claiming that someone in Canada has a better claim to the British throne than King Charles?" "Not just a better claim, Detective Inspector. The only legitimate claim. According to the laws of succession that existed in 1807, the current royal family should never have inherited the crown." He pulled out a genealogical chart that was far more detailed than anything they had seen before. Captain Ross had been quiet, but now he spoke up. "Sir Edmund, I worked with you for 15 years. You were always loyal to the royal family. What changed? Why are you doing this now?" The elderly man sat down heavily in his chair. "Captain Ross, I gave my entire adult life to serving what I thought was the rightful monarchy. But 3 years ago, while researching family archives for the king's coronation, I discovered documents that proved everything I had believed was wrong." He gestured to a box of materials in the corner. "I found letters, marriage certificates, and baptismal records that had been hidden in private collections for generations. The evidence was overwhelming. I spent 2 years trying to convince myself it wasn't true, but the facts were undeniable." Dr. Thornton was examining the genealogical chart with growing interest. "Sir Edmund, some of these connections would require DNA testing to verify. Have you attempted to contact the person you believe is the rightful heir?" "No, Dr. Thornton. That would be dangerous for them. If word got out before the evidence was properly presented, they could become a target. That's why I chose to reveal the information through official channels first. He looked at Camilla. Your Majesty, I chose you because I know you care about doing what's right even when it's difficult. The room fell silent as everyone processed this information. If Sir Edmund was telling the truth, he wasn't trying to destroy the monarchy out of malice. He was trying to correct what he saw as a historical injustice. But the implications were staggering. Camilla spoke slowly, choosing her words carefully. Sir Edmund, even if everything you're saying is accurate, you've put me in an impossible position. I can't betray my own family, but I also can't ignore evidence of historical fraud. Your Majesty, I'm not asking you to betray anyone. I'm asking you to help reveal the truth. If the evidence is made public properly, through the right channels, perhaps there could be a peaceful resolution. Maybe the rightful heir would choose to support the current monarchy rather than challenge it. Director Harrison was making notes frantically. Sir Edmund, this information has national security implications. If these claims became public without proper verification, they could destabilize the government and damage Britain's international reputation. Sir Edmund nodded gravely. Which is exactly why I spent 40 years being careful about it. But I'm 68 years old, Director Harrison. If I don't act now, this truth might die with me. The British people deserve to know their real history, even if it's uncomfortable. Sarah realized they were facing a decision that could change British history forever. The evidence was compelling but not conclusive. The potential consequences were enormous. And sitting in a small cottage in the Scottish Highlands, they had to decide what to do with information that could shake the foundations of one of the world's oldest monarchies. The decision was made in that small Scottish cottage, but it would take months to implement properly. After 6 hours of intense discussion, reviewing evidence, and making secure phone calls to London, they reached an agreement that surprised everyone. Sir Edmund would work with a special historical commission, secretly established by the government, to verify his research using modern scientific methods. DNA samples would be obtained from the Canadian family he had identified, compared with DNA from authenticated royal artifacts. Historical documents would be analyzed by multiple independent experts from universities around the world. Camilla agreed to keep the matter confidential while the investigation proceeded, but she insisted on regular updates. If this evidence proves accurate, she told Sir Edmund, I will personally ensure that the truth is handled with dignity for all involved parties, including the people you claim are the rightful heirs. Dr. Thornton volunteered to lead the historical verification process. This could be the most important genealogical investigation in modern history, she said. Regardless of the outcome, the research methods and findings will advance our understanding of royal succession laws and historical record-keeping. The journey back to London was quiet and thoughtful. Sarah found herself reflecting on how a routine security check had led to discoveries that might rewrite British history. The documents were secured in government vaults, and the investigation would continue under the highest levels of secrecy. 3 months later, the first DNA results came back. The Canadian family Sir Edmund had identified did indeed share genetic markers with authenticated royal artifacts from the Stuart period. The evidence strongly suggested that the bloodline he had traced was legitimate, but the historical documentation remained incomplete, with some gaps that might never be filled. The Canadian family, when finally contacted through diplomatic channels, was shocked to learn of their possible heritage. Margaret Stuart MacLeod, a 45-year-old teacher from Toronto, had no idea that her family might have any connection to British royalty. Her initial reaction was disbelief, followed by concern about how this knowledge might affect her quiet life. After 6 months of investigation, the Historical Commission presented their findings to a select group of government officials and royal family members. The evidence suggested that Sir Edmund's claims had substantial merit, but absolute proof remained elusive due to gaps in historical records. King Charles, when privately briefed on the findings, surprised everyone with his response. Rather than dismissing the claims or demanding secrecy, he requested a private meeting with Margaret Stuart MacLeod. The meeting took place at a secure location in Canada, away from media attention. What happened during that meeting remained private, but the outcome was announced 6 months later in a carefully worded statement from Buckingham Palace. The royal family acknowledged that historical succession laws had been complex and sometimes poorly documented. They announced the establishment of a new historical research foundation, headed jointly by Dr. Thornton and Margaret Stewart MacLeod. The foundation would study royal genealogy and succession history, not to challenge current arrangements but to ensure accurate historical records for future generations. Margaret was invited to become an honorary member of the extended royal family, with a modest title and a role in historical research. Sir Edmund Hartwell was quietly pardoned for his unauthorized actions and invited to join the foundation as a senior researcher. His 40 years of careful documentation became the foundation's first major project. He never publicly revealed all the details of his discoveries, but his work contributed to a more complete understanding of British royal history. Camilla emerged from the entire experience with a deeper appreciation for the complexities of royal heritage. She became a patron of the Historical Foundation and frequently spoke about the importance of understanding and preserving accurate historical records, even when they challenged accepted narratives. Sarah received a commendation for her handling of the sensitive investigation. She often thought about that rainy Tuesday evening at Heathrow Airport and how a routine security check had uncovered one of the most significant historical mysteries of the modern era. The story never became fully public, though historians occasionally referenced new discoveries in royal genealogical research in academic papers. The documents that had been hidden in Camilla's luggage were eventually displayed in a special exhibition at the British Museum, presented as examples of how historical records can be incomplete and sometimes misleading. Margaret Stewart MacLeod never claimed the throne or challenged the current royal family's legitimacy. Instead, she used her unique position to bridge historical gaps and ensure that future genealogical research would be more accurate and complete. Her children grew up knowing they had an unusual family history, but they lived normal lives in Canada. Years later, when asked about the incident, Camilla would simply say that it taught her that truth is often more complex than official records suggest. She never regretted the difficult months of investigation, believing that the pursuit of historical accuracy had ultimately strengthened rather than weakened the monarchy. The foundation continues its work today, quietly researching royal genealogy and succession history. Sir Edmund, now in his 70s, still works there several days a week, finally able to pursue his historical research with official support rather than in secret. His cottage in Scotland has become a small museum of genealogical research methods, and sometimes, late at night at Heathrow Airport, security officers still tell the story of the evening when a routine luggage check almost changed the course of British history. Sarah, now retired, occasionally visits the airport and remembers how one rainy evening taught her that the most extraordinary discoveries can happen in the most ordinary places.